Hi, guys. Welcome to another episode of Hashing Out the Law. I have with me today Natela Shenon. She's an attorney. She usually helps businesses and entrepreneurs in normal times, but she's especially busy helping them during these crazy COVID times. Hi, Natela. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing as well as one can given the circumstances, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. So, I wanted to have you on before this whole thing started so we could talk about how you help businesses. Um, but now, this thing happened. When I say this thing, I mean this COVID-19 pandemic.
Pretty sure everybody knows what you're talking about.
But so now I wanna focus our talk a little bit more about what businesses can do during these times and how they can prepare for when these times are over and we go into the phases of opening back up. And I know you've been talking about this on a whole bunch of other shows, so you keep repeating yourself, but some of our listeners don't know that and they haven't heard you say it. So I want them to have an opportunity to say this. So let's say I'm a business,
Yeah.
and I am a new business, not that one that's been established, but I was in business for a year and this happened. What
Right.
steps can I take? And oh, by the way, let me back up a little bit. Since we're further into this pandemic, I already got my PPE loan, and the funds were just distributed to me. But
Right.
what can I do? Because what are they going to be forgiven? How do I get them forgiven? Can you give us a little bit of insight into that, please?
Yeah, so it's a loaded question, so I'm going to parse it a little bit if you don't
Please.
mind. So before we even get to the PPP funds and whether they're going to be forgiven and how, I think that, well, first of all, congratulations for getting the PPP. A lot of people still haven't gotten it. So you're one of the lucky ones. So good for you. But before we even get to the PPP, I think that if you came to me as a client, the first thing I would ask you is, well, what does your business do? And, you know, do you think that it could even weather this storm? Right? It's a very, very important question to ask yourself as a business owner, because you don't want to throw good money to chase after bad money, so to speak. Right? So let's say you're a tiny little restaurant, you're a hole in the wall, and maybe your food's great, but not many people know about you. And you're still trying to establish your reputation, and now you've been shut down, and there's really no telling when you're going to reopen. And you are probably going to, even if you do reopen, you're going to be able to reopen at only 25% capacity, and it's going to be barely enough to cover your bills. Right? So if that's the situation that you find yourself in, then I would say to you, that you should think about how to wind it down. How to
Okay.
wind it down with, the minimum amount of liability, to the entity. I would have to look about, to see how you're structured. Are your personal assets protected, right? Because you might have, a commercial lease where maybe you're a personal guarantor, or maybe it's in your personal name rather than in the name of your entity. Are there other vendors to whom you owe money? Is there a business partner who put more money in than you that could sue you? So I would right away go into this like mitigation winding down mode, because in my mind, someone that finds themselves in a position like that, they ain't gonna make it. Even if they got the PPP loan and they have 8 weeks worth of pay for their employees who are not even working and who might not even want to come back to work, because it's possible that what they're getting from unemployment is paying them more than what they were making working for you on a salary. In that particular situation, I would say to you that you should consider cutting your losses, so to speak. So that's sort of one type of a scenario before we even get to everything else, right? Because we want to have a really clear path in terms of what we're doing and is it worthwhile.
Okay. That's a very good point. But here's my thing. That's a hard pill for me to swallow. I saved all my money to open up this business, and you're telling me to shut it down. Why? Why should I shut it down? And I'm thinking with my heart instead of my brain. So how would you?
I'm here to help you take the emotion out of it
Okay.
and help you to, like, that's kind of what I do. I think in a way, I help a lot of my clients, see more clearly. It's really, really unfortunate that this happened, and it sucks. It really does suck. But if you are between the option of, shutting it down, cutting your losses, obviously being so upset about it because it was all your savings and you put your heart and soul into it, versus, going to all of your friends and family and having to borrow more money so that you can keep afloat just to not make it 6 months down the road. That's not a practical solution, and it's not in the best interest probably, of your family, right?
Right.
So we got to look at those things. So that's the way that I would approach it. If you're a restaurant that has an established reputation and people really love you and you have a following, then of course I would say to you, well, think creatively about what you can do. A lot of restaurants are doing, I don't know how we got into it being a restaurant, but that's just kind of what I came up with. But a lot of restaurants are doing really cool stuff, other than just takeout.
Right.
Doing, I don't know, like bakeries are doing cookie kits that, people can do at home with their kids. And some restaurants are taking their most famous dishes and they're giving you like a meal kit that you can prepare at home so that it's fresh. Some are turning their businesses into like a grocery store delivery type place. And I think these are all really, really great and very creative solutions.
Is that,
So,
I'm sorry, is that one of the things that you offer is to come up with ideas of how business can change themselves? Or do you stick just to the legal aspect of the business?
I can. It's actually very interesting. I love, the marketing aspect of things. And, if there's a client, I think that my best sort of quality is that I'm a strategist. Okay. You can tell me any situation that you're in, and I can try to help you navigate it in the most efficient and cost-effective way possible. So if that involves sort of, marketing ideas and thinking, well, how can we innovate? How can we give people what they need today, given what we have? Yeah, I'm game for that. That would be fun.
Okay. So now you decided my business is actually viable, and I am going to survive this.
Potentially.
Help me. Yeah, potentially. Help me. What do I do now?
Right. So let's say you're a business. We're not going to say that you're a restaurant or you're just a business. We're not going to talk about who you are. I think that the first thing I would do with you is I would sit down with you and I would say, okay, so how are you functioning? Are you completely shut down right now where no income is coming in whatsoever? And you just have to basically rely on your operating reserve and maybe the, PPP or whatever else you might have gotten from the government. Are you semi-functional? i.e., okay, maybe you're not at 100% of what you were prior to coronavirus, but maybe you're at 50% or at 70% or at 30%, or are you fully functional? So I think that all those things also make a difference, because then we're going to sit down and have to make some really difficult decisions about your expenses and what you're spending your money on, and your employees as your assets. And we're going to decide, whom to keep full-time, whom to potentially reduce to part-time, whom to furlough. Do you have any expenses that you don't need on an ongoing basis right now? For example, things like parking. We all pay a ton of money, in LA for parking at our office buildings. And like, even it dawned on me like a couple of days in when I was going through this process in my own mind, because I'm also a business. I was like, oh, I should cancel the parking. It's month to month. We sure as hell are not going to need it for a while. Right. So it's going down sort of the list of these things that we can eliminate that we're not using, or maybe that used to be a luxury and they're not essential to us, so that we can, bank as much money as possible. Because the worst thing, in my mind about this pandemic is that we don't know when it's going to really end. Right. If you came to me and said, I know 100% that in 30 days or in 60 days, this is all going to be over and things are going to go back to normal, then it's a very different plan of action, right? But because we are so uncertain about what's going to happen, our goal is to maintain your business as, efficient as possible, with the least amount of expenses as possible, so that you can bank as much money as possible, so that you can keep going like this for as long as you need to before things getting back to normal. Because the PPP money is great. Well, yes, the money is great. The whole structuring of the program is not great. And there's a lot of uncertainty even in how it's going to get forgiven. I mean, in my mind, I personally think that it's silly that a business that's completely shut down and is not. I have a client that's a nail salon. They're a really well-known nail salon in the Valley. And they called me and they said, listen, we got our PPP money, but we don't know what to do because A, we can't open. B, none of our technicians want to come back because they're making more money through unemployment than if they were to come back and work for us. And They can't even come back to work for us. So what are we supposed to do with this money other than presumably maybe, spending 25% of it on, rent on utilities? We don't know what to do, right? So my advice to someone in a situation like that is I said to them, look, in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, I wish I had inside information, but I don't. I think the forgiveness guidelines are going to get adjusted because they're not flexible enough to work for every business. And we have many types of businesses, some that are operating, some that are not. They can't stay stagnant like this. So I said, I think they're going to get adjusted. I think that you should take the money. You should most definitely take it. Never say no to taking the PPP loan because it's practically a free loan. It's at 1% for 2 years. It's practically free. And eventually you're going to reopen and you are allowed to use it on your payroll. Sure, it would be nice if you did it over the course of 8 weeks and 100% of it, would get forgiven. But, maybe you're going to have a hard time starting back up. And this could give you that, initial jump start to open back up. And then, yeah, sure, you might have to pay it back, 2 years from now. But it's better to have it and be able to, open back up than not to have it and not have any sort of startup capital, so to speak. And if you don't need it as startup capital, then, you pay it back sooner than later and you don't have to incur, the 1% over the course of 2 years. Right. So that's kind of my opinion on those businesses that don't know what to do with it. Those businesses that do have, employees obviously that are working, they should spend it on their payroll because they would be paying their payroll anyway. I have some clients that are choosing, they've retained their workforce, but they've reduced everyone to part-time because there's simply not enough business coming in, right? And so my advice to them is, well, then, in my opinion, I don't think that it's a good business decision, even though these people only have part-time worth of work, to bring them back to full-time and, and pay them full-time's worth of salary if the business is not coming in. You're better off banking this money, stretching it over a longer period of time for them as part-time employees, and then potentially having it be a loan that you'll repay. But because of the uncertainty of the way things are, that's how I would play it.
I see. Okay, very good. Now, I have so many questions for you, but I don't want to overwhelm you or overwhelm you.
Oh, no, shoot.
So we decided, I've got my PPP, we decided how to use it, and I'm adjusting myself to this COVID-19 situation. How do I get prepared for the phases that are coming in? And when I say phases that are coming in, I mean the phases that California specifically is using, or the nation is using, to start going back to normal. What strategy as a business lawyer would you help me with?
Well, again, I'm sorry, it's a loaded question because I don't know what business you are.
Right.
So there's a variety of things that I think a lot of businesses should be doing. But it depends on who you are, right? So let's say you are some type of a business that works out of an office, right? Like you're not a store and you're not a restaurant, you're an insurance company.
Right. Okay.
You work out of an office, right? So a big part of what you should be thinking about right now, even though I don't believe we're close to that yet, I think it's only the non-essential businesses that cannot work remotely can go back to the office, or maybe we're not even there yet.
I think California said that as early as this Friday, like flower shops, retail shops, music
That's different.
shops.
That's only curbside pickup. That's different.
Curbside pickup, exactly.
So for those who are going back into the office, you need to think about, how your space is physically structured, because we're gonna, for a very long time, go through this process of having to be 6 feet apart and having the requisite, protective equipment. So you literally should sit down and look at the layout of your office. Do you have like a bajillion cubicles and people all on top of each other? You're not going to be able to have that anymore. So given the fact that you're not going to be able to have that anymore, you should think about, can you physically restructure? Now is actually a really good time if you were going to make like improvements to your office, or
Right.
like, because no one's there. So that's something to think about if you've got the means and you can do it. Right. So you need to think about how to physically restructure. And then, sometimes there's not enough space, that might not work. So then you maybe should think about coming up with a staggered work schedule where people take turns coming in on certain days or during certain hours so that they're not in close proximity to each other.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Now, I know besides the social obligation to do the distancing at work, and maybe the health and moral obligation as well, is the government, if you know, going to be enforcing that? Meaning, let's say I go back to work, I make my employees come back, and everybody is the way they were before, and they agreed, but it's not, 6 feet apart. Everybody is still on top of each other on the cubicles. Will I be legally obligated to change that? And is the government going to force me to do that? Do you know that answer?
I don't know that the government is going to force you to do anything, but I can fairly safely predict that you're going to have a lot of employment claims on your hands if you do that, because employees are going to be unhappy and they're going to start to sue because they're going to consider this to not be a safe work environment.
Right. Okay.
So that's what I think is going to happen. And by virtue of that, I mean, obviously nobody wants to do that to their employees, right? But someone's going to get sick inevitably and very unfortunately, and maybe even somewhere else. And then they're going to blame it on the employer that did not, allow for there to be proper distancing. And the same thing, disinfection protocols, like internal protocols where someone goes and wipes everything down, common areas, things like that, several times a day, even having like masks for your employees.
Right.
I would think that these are all things like that's what would encourage your employees to want to come back to the office.
I don't even think there is going to be common areas anymore. I think the common area is going to be uncommon. But one of the things you touched upon, which is very interesting, is, and I was listening to a radio program, and other business analysts and strategists were there, and they were saying the same thing you touched upon, where you break up your team into smaller teams, like team A, B, and C,
Right.
and team A only comes in on Mondays, team B comes in on Tuesdays, and team C comes in on Wednesdays, and this might be the normal. As a business lawyer, do you think that this is going to be a normal, not just after this crisis, but in the long term? Is this going to be something that businesses are going to be using in the long term?
I mean, I'm going to give you like a true lawyer answer, right? So I think it depends. I think once again, I think it really depends. I think people have sort of a dual feeling. Some people are like, oh my God, this like remote thing is awesome. I could totally do this. I don't have to take off my pajamas. No one sees what I'm wearing on the bottom, right? And I could just do this from home all day long. And then there are other people, like, to be quite honest with you, myself included, that's saying, okay, this is fine, but like, gosh, I've got 2 dogs and 2 kids and everyone's running around and my kids keep getting, logged out of their Zoom classes and I can't wait to go back to the office. So I think that it just depends. I think it also depends on what's going to happen with commercial space. And I think that it's a very, very big unknown because a lot of people are not able to keep up with their commercial lease payments. And it's great that there's an ordinance out there that basically says, oh, well, guess what? You don't need to pay anything until the stay at home is lifted, but then you have to repay everything, within 90 days. And there's no way that these businesses are going to be able to come up with what the payments that they've missed, especially if they haven't been operating at all, to be able to repay those amounts in 90 days. So situations like these might actually force, I think, some businesses to take their operation completely remote. Another side of it, I think that it's just more it's become the norm, right? So, in the past, you branded yourself with having like a beautiful office in a nice location. And, that's validated, some professionals in terms of, who they were and how good they were at what they did. A little bit, right? Like you would agree with that. I don't think that's going to be a thing anymore. I don't think that's what it's going to be about. Because people are going to have gotten so used to doing these things through Zoom or through phone or FaceTime or whatever else is going to come out, that it's really not going to matter how nice your office is. And so that might encourage people to do more stuff remotely, or to have these, team A, team B, team C. I mean, depending really on their space.
Right.
Maybe team A doesn't come in at all if they're not essential to having like a physical presence. They're remote completely.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting. One question that comes to my mind is, and this is a legal question. Like you said, the ordinance is there. I can't pay my rent. Okay, I don't have to pay it for 90 days. After 90 days, all is due. I can't pay it. My lease is still there. I can't pay it, I have to default. Do you, when I come to you as my lawyer, what do we do now? Usually if this COVID-19 thing hadn't happened, I know I'd be in default, try to negotiate, mitigate the lease. What do we do now?
Oh, they're gonna put you in default as soon as they can. Believe me, and that's exactly what's gonna happen. What you do is you don't wait. What you do is you don't wait until it's 90 days and you're stuck and you don't have the money. What you do is you try to negotiate now. That's what I tell my clients. So, you know, anything from, again, it really depends on what the operation is and what kind of a forecast, you know, the business has, even with what's going on now. But anything from saying, hey, you know, I'm going to miss the next 90 days rather than having it balloon, you know, at the end, can we just take these amounts and can we divide the total over the course of the remainder of my lease? And maybe instead of me having to pay you $30,000, you know, in 90 days, I could just resume my normal payments, but have them be maybe $1,000 higher. If let's say you have 30 months left on your term. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Right. So another option is, you know, rather than saying you know, my business is down, I don't have to pay you anything, so I'm not going to pay you anything right now. You say, hey, you know, I can pay you something. I can't pay the full amount. In fact, I probably won't be able to pay the full amount ever again. Can we renegotiate the term completely, you know, so that I can start paying you today rather than having to wait, you know, because we don't know what if it's a year. Like, it's just as uncertain for the landlord as it is for us.
Right.
Right. So I think that being proactive is very, very, very important. I mean, at the end of the day, of course, if you're stuck and you didn't negotiate and here you are and you haven't paid and you get a notice of default, then, you know, we figure out if, you know, there are any applicable defenses, like, you know, is there a force majeure clause in your lease agreement? You know, could we make an argument in terms of maybe frustration of purpose of the contract or impossibility of performance, you know, things like that. I do hope, I don't know if I believe that it will happen, but I hope that it will happen. There needs to be better guidance on the subject, and there needs to be more flexibility, because it's going to be impossible. There's just going to be a plethora of these evictions and lawsuits, and you know, I don't know, some people are going to probably consider bankruptcies. It's again a loaded question, because then I'm going to ask you, well, are you a personal guarantor on this lease? Because if you're not a personal guarantor on this lease and it's, you know, with this entity, and maybe this entity doesn't have any assets, then there are other things that you can do creatively to sort of, you know, get out of it. You know, I don't want to give too much away. You're going to have to call me for that. But you know what I'm saying? So those are kind of the options that I would be looking at with the client.
As a lawyer, I hate when people ask me hypothetical questions, but I'm going to ask you one.
Go for it. It's all right.
All right. So especially on the west side of LA, there is a huge company that owns a lot of office buildings. I won't name them. And they own office buildings all across the city as well.
There's one in the Valley too. I wonder if we're thinking about the same one.
We probably are. It's a publicly traded company.
Right.
They own a whole bunch of office buildings. And basically, if you want to have an office in an office building, especially on the west side and even in central LA, they are the person. You have no other choice because they own all the buildings.
Wow.
Now, you have a lease with them.
Right.
And whatever term of lease it is. Do you think that you can negotiate with them to lower your lease? And if you can't, and you are forced to, you know, just give up the lease, do you think there's any chance that the government will eventually help these businesses by passing a law saying you can't make them default or you can't collect the whole thing? And I know it's a hypothetical.
No, I do actually think that. In fact, you know, if you are not able to negotiate anything and they're just not working with you and they're not budging, and I hate giving this advice, but I'm going to just say it. I don't think you should pay right now. I think you should bank. Okay. If you've been affected, I don't think that you should go out of your way to make these payments if it's affecting, I don't know, your livelihood, or maybe if you have to fire an employee that, you know, is kind of necessary, but not really that necessary. I don't think you should make that move in order to pay it. I think you should bank it because you might have to pay it back, but I don't think you should, because I actually hypothetically think that might in fact happen, because think about it. So these landlords presumably have mortgages on these buildings, right? And yeah, I know that residential properties that have mortgages on them, they're giving people forbearances left and right. Right. And then there's all this talk about, oh, the Fed's going to buy all the bad debt and things like that. Right. So the hope is that it's going to trickle backwards to the tenant, to the commercial tenant, or to the residential tenant, where presumably, we're just going to be like, okay, this never happened, clean slate. We're going to go back to the way that it was on March 15th and all is forgiven.
Right.
I know it's sort of a crazy thing to think about, but so is coronavirus. So is the PPP and everything else. So I actually do hypothetically think that it might happen. I hope it does.
I hope so too. It's very interesting times. Very interesting times. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about all this stuff, but I want the listeners to actually to be able to call you and hire you as a lawyer if they need to. Now, how do they reach you?
Well, they can call me. Our main office number, which is still open. The office is there. We're not at the office. We're all working from home, but we are fully set up as a virtual office. And if you call, you're probably going to get to talk to my amazing assistant, whose name is Maggie. So I actually have a very easy phone number. It's 855-4-SHANNON, SHENON. Otherwise known as 855-474-3666. You can also email me directly at nshannon@shannonlaw.com. You can visit our website, shannonlaw.com. I have a variety of social media accounts. Of course, Shannon Law Group has its own account on both Instagram and Facebook. Or if you want to hear more of my personal wisdom, then you can follow me on Instagram, and my handle is Business Guru at Law.
Awesome. And by the way, for all the listeners and the viewers, we're going to include all of Shannon's info. We're going to link her on all our social media, so it should be easy to find in case you need to call her and hire her as your attorney. I have so many questions. I could keep going and going on, but I'm gonna turn it over to you a little bit. I want you to talk about something that you think it's important that we haven't touched upon, whether it's COVID related or not. It doesn't really matter, as long as it's something that you think it's important and the viewers and the listeners need to know or be aware of.
I think that the most important thing right now in the times that we're in is not even so much, law related. I think it's more, if I had to give one piece of advice to business owners, is to just don't be stagnant. Don't sit there and wait for this to pass. Adapt. Think about how you can change your product or your service to become necessary to people today, sitting at home with all the virtual stuff that we have going on. And a lot of people are already doing it. I think that you would be doing yourself a disservice if you just sat and was like, okay, I'm just going to wait another month. No, life will never be the same. It won't. It's not going to happen. As much as we want to believe that it will, it won't. So the best thing to do is to just go with it, lean into it, and adapt. That's the biggest and most important piece of advice I think that I would want to give to the listeners.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I know you're a busy woman with the kids and the dog and everything. I really, truly appreciate you being on. I really enjoyed our talk. Hopefully we'll have you on after this COVID-19 is over, where we can have a normal conversation and not worry about what we're going to do with our PPEs and if we're going to foreclose on us and things like that. It was a pleasure. Again, the viewers can reach you on shannonlaw.com. That's the main website. We'll make sure we'll tag you on everything else. We'll have it, all the links on the podcast description as well, so the viewers and the listeners can just go there, click on the links, and get in touch with you.
Thank you so much again for having me. It was a pleasure. And thanks everyone for listening or watching.
Everybody have a good day. Thank you.